couple of weeks ago that continues to come up, and it has to do with Joseph, whose life we are just beginning to talk about. Joseph is one of two people in the Old Testament of whom there is nothing negative said. There's no mention of sin or even of any kind of serious error. And the other person is Daniel. Daniel also, there's no mention of sin, and Daniel is held up as kind of a picture of righteousness in an unrighteous world. Now, there are some others of whom nothing negative is said. Certainly Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Daniel's three buddies, there's nothing negative said about them, but you've got to understand they're not major characters. They're not round characters. They're flat characters. They play a single part and move on. I mean, another one of whom there's nothing negative really said is Naaman. And Naaman is an Aramean general that attacks Israel. Certainly there's lots of negative to say, but he's a flat character. He plays a bit part. He's illustration for something else. We're talking about people who are central characters, who are well developed in the Bible. We just finished Jacob, not this Jacob, the Jacob in Scripture. And of course, there was just all kinds of horrible stuff said about Jacob, although I've never said anything bad about this Jacob. And we finished Isaac. Isaac is one of my favorite guys in the Old Testament, and yet there's a lot of negativity about Isaac. Abraham, certainly the father of faith, our example, there are negative things said about him. And I don't mean people saying, oh, he was a horrible guy. I mean recounting of mistakes and rebellions. We certainly see Abraham wander off and do wrong things. And we do with David and Hezekiah and all of the great kings. We even see Jeremiah fuss. We see Elijah become depressed and turn away. I mean, we see this in most of the major characters, but not Joseph and not Daniel. But what about that section in Romans where it says all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God? Are those guys somehow excluded? That section in Romans, I have it written down here. There's no one righteous, no, not one. There's no one who understands. There is no one who seeks God. All have turned away. They have become worthless. There is no one who does good, not even one. Their throats are open graves. Their tongues practice deceit. The poison of vipers is on their lips. Their mouths are full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Ruin and misery mark their ways. In the way of peace they do not know. There is no fear of God before their eyes. Well, that doesn't sound like what we read about Joseph. How do we put this all together? By the way, that was Romans 3. I think I said Romans 2 just a minute ago instead of Romans 3. Well, that's a really big question. And there are so many different aspects that we need to look at it. But let's start from the easiest point, and that is this. Simply because there's nothing recorded negative about Joseph doesn't mean he never did anything wrong. Just because it didn't get written down doesn't mean he never sassed his mom or stole candy from his brother or whatever. Just because it's not mentioned doesn't mean it didn't happen. Well, then why is it not mentioned? Well, because it wasn't consequential to his life. When you look at Jacob and you look at the wrong things that Jacob did, when Jacob made a choice to rebel, you can see the impact immediately and long-term in his life. You can see it immediately. It defines his story. The things that Joseph did do not define his story. His story is defined by a continual following after God. The thing about being a Christian is your life can be very much the same. You can, even as a person who defines yourself as Christian, or identifies yourself as Christian, you can be one who's defined by your mistakes. I knew a man that considered himself a Christian. He was in his 60s. He considered himself a lifelong Christian. He'd certainly gone to church quite a bit. He was an angry and bitter man. His children could not stand him. He had no relationship with them. He had a pretty strained relationship with his wife. He didn't have a whole lot of friends. He made a lot of bad financial decisions, and he treated people poorly. And yet he considered himself a Christian. The defining features in his life were the negative features, were how he chose to treat people, how he chose to put himself first, how he chose to reject God. That is, until he came to know God. He met God in his early 60s, and his life was radically transformed. And from that point on, his life was defined by seeking to make relationship with his children, seeking to repair relationship with his wife. He was no longer a miser, he was a giver. If you would have known him only after he knew Christ, you would see a life defined by something very different. It wasn't that he never made mistakes again. It was that when you considered that man prior to Christ, you considered a man who was very selfish, and his selfishness guided the principles of his life. When you considered that man after he came to know Christ, well, he was redeemed, and his redeemed state defined his life. So just because there's nothing negative said about Daniel and Joseph doesn't mean they weren't sinners just like we are. They inherited a life of sin. I knew a man named Forrest, one of the most godly men I ever knew. I knew Forrest. I worked very closely with Forrest over a period of nearly 10 years. And I cannot think of a single thing that Forrest did or said that I found the slightest bit offensive. He was just always humble and giving. And thinking back on it, I can't think of a single person that didn't like Forrest. Everybody liked him. Even those who didn't agree with him because of his quiet and humble yet outspoken faith. Of course there are some who disagreed with him. There was actually a customer of ours, who self-identified as a Wiccan, as a witch. And Forrest, this incredibly godly man, she loved him. She just thought he was one of the greatest guys. And she was constantly asking, can't I send Forrest over to take care of whatever issue she was dealing with that day? Knowing that the two of them completely disagreed about the most fundamental things. But the thing that defined Forrest was his humble faith. He wasn't a perfect man. He was just like me, just like you. But he was so humble in his following of Christ. That's what defined him. That's what we see in Joseph and Daniel. This desire for God, this humble desire for God, that was more powerful to those around them even than the failings that they no doubt had. So it's not that they're perfect. It's just that there wasn't anything notable to record that was negative. When you make mistakes and when I make mistakes, we have a choice. We can continue down the road of those mistakes and let them define us, or we can turn from them very quickly, turn back to God, and those mistakes don't define us. What does define us is not the falling down in that case. What defines us is the getting back up. And that's what we see with so many of these characters. So I don't really have a problem with the fact that nothing negative is said about Joseph. Pardon me as I drink my coffee while it's hot. One of the other questions that's come up about this exact same topic is in some ways much more petty, but in some ways much bigger. And that is, there's a basic argument, philosophical argument about mankind. Is mankind inherently good, or is mankind inherently bad, or is mankind inherently neither? In other words, when a baby is born and there's been no input, they haven't learned anything yet, are they naturally a good person? Someone who is loving and caring about others, and left alone with no input at all, will they grow up to be completely free of all hate and animosity and racism and selfishness? Or are they inherently bad with no input? Will they be completely selfish, completely arrogant, completely racist? Or are they just absolutely neutral? There is nothing about them that goes either way, that it's all about input. It's all about what they learn. Are they an absolute blank slate? I remember learning the blank slate theory, this idea that children are simply a sum of what we invest in them. Which one is it? And how do we define that? And how do we determine that? And then the question gets even pettier when we start looking at various strains of Christianity, various Christian thought and denominational concepts and these kinds of things. And basically what it comes down to within Christian thought is, On one side of the equation, is man completely depraved? There's nothing good about him till Christ comes. On the other side of the equation, does man have complete capacity to be good? He just simply has to choose the right thing. And how do we get through that? Well, I would like to give you my answer to those deep and yet petty philosophical and religious questions in the simplest way possible. I've had 4 children in my life. We've raised 4 children. We lost 1. We had 5. We raised 4. And they are all either adults or very nearly adults at this time. And at this point, I'd say, for the most part, they're pretty good kids. They're pretty good kids. I don't know people who don't like my children, probably because I wouldn't want to know people who don't like my children. I don't hear a lot of negative things about them. The only negative things that I've heard about them, especially as teenagers, have been from people who didn't like them because of the standard that they upheld. Because they were people who cared about other people, and selfish kids don't get along with loving kids very well. So I'm pretty proud of my kids. They've done a good job. Is that because of my input? Mine and Wendy's. We just had blank slates, and we only wrote happy thoughts on the blank slates. Nope. That is definitely not it. And a perfect example for that actually isn't my children, it's Joseph himself. This guy grew up in the most dysfunctional of families with a father who was an absolute rebel against God, and yet this guy grew up desiring God so deeply. Nope, it's not a matter of input. Is it because my children are basically good? Is it because my children were just always loving, kind people? Abso-flippin-lutely not. The guy who came up with the blank slate theory, or the person who said humans are born naturally good, they never had children. They never had toddlers, obviously, because toddlers are remarkably selfish. Everything is mine. Everything is about me, and they throw a flippin' temper fit if they don't get what they want. Babies are much the same way, but we forgive babies because they're so darn cute. It's a good thing babies are cute. They probably wouldn't live to be grown-ups. We wouldn't put up with that. They are the most selfish of people. They don't care that mommy and daddy are tired. They only care that it's 4 o'clock in the morning and they don't want to sleep anymore. Children are born absolutely focused on only one thing, and that is themselves. I would have to say that the disease of selfishness, which is what John Wesley referred to as idolatry, the original sin, I would have to say that that disease of selfishness is innate. The children are born with it. I did not teach my children to lie or to steal. I remember one of my children, who I'm not going to name because she just might be here this morning, but she's, of the 4 that I have, she's, one of the youngest. I remember a few years ago when that particular child was maybe 3, and her oldest sister would have been about 13. We were heading downstairs to where their bedrooms were. We were in a 2-story house, and we were heading from the upstairs to the downstairs, and there was kind of a pony wall next to the stairs. And on the floor area there, at the bottom of the pony wall, there were all these peanut shells, just like trash, just peanut shells, just sitting there on the floor. And we had a little dog named Joey, but I'm telling you what, there's no way that Joey could crack open a peanut shell and eat the peanut out from the inside and leave the perfect peanut shell. It's pretty obvious one of my kids has been eating peanuts, which is fine. That's what they're for, right? That's fine. That's fine. The problem is they just left a mess behind. And it was done in such a way that you could tell they were trying to hide it, that they didn't want anybody to know. So I called my 3 older children together and I said, do you guys know anything about this? Because it was totally out of character for them. It's like, do you guys know anything about this? They're like, no. Huh. So I called my other child, who I'm not going to name because she just might be here this morning. And she came up in all her little 3-year-old cuteness. And I said, hey, unnamed child, who did this? And her eyes got big for a second and she's like, Kylie, she says, her oldest sister. Kylie did it. So just wait right here. And I'm trying not to laugh at this point. I'm like, Kylie, can you come here for a minute? Uh-huh. Hey, Kylie, do you know anything about these? And of course, we'd already talked. Do you know anything about these peanut shells? No, I have no idea where those came from. And the other unnamed child was like, oh. Now listen, I did not teach that sweet, innocent child to steal food from the pantry and to eat it in secret and then to hide the remains, and then to lie about it. She developed that all by herself. She learned how to do that all by herself. It's innate. She was born with it. So what makes my children now to be relatively positive people? How did she just outgrow that selfishness? No. Was it because her mom and I did such a good job of teaching her to not be selfish? And she watched that VeggieTales. Which one is that? Madame Blueberry? Don't be selfish. Is that the one? Is that what taught her how to avoid? Well, no, it's because they came to know Christ. It's because my children were raised in an environment where they were exposed to the things of Christ, and each one of them has, in their own way, sought after Christ. And you got to start leaving behind the selfishness to get to know Christ. It's not a matter of what's innate, it's a matter of transformation in their lives. So when we look at Joseph and we look at Daniel, that's what we're looking at. We're looking at people whose lives have been transformed by the power of God in their lives, not people who just flat didn't sin. I hope that helps to answer that question. Are there any other thoughts or questions about that concept? Anything else you guys want me to get into on that? Because I'm prepared to leave that behind and deal with other questions. We're going to try to get through these last 13 chapters of Genesis pretty darn quickly, even though we're going to miss some Sunday morning, me preaching Sunday mornings to, we have a missionary coming, and then we have the conference, the prayer conference. We're still going to get through it pretty quickly because I want to be breaking into the Christmas story when we get to December and we transition to the New Testament for a little bit. So if you have thoughts or concerns or questions, please bring them up and we'll work on them from there. That's what I have for you this morning.